How's it going, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning into this video. This will be the second installment of answering your questions. I was asked if I could do a video on how am I getting 20 miles to the gallon out of my lifted 6.5 on 35s. And good question. Then they are, for the time that they were built, they were the most fuel efficient truck, and in my opinion, the best ride quality truck from factory in the 90s, as far as Ford, Dodge, and GM. That's just my opinion. Everybody's opinion is different, so on and so forth. So how am I getting 20 miles to the gallon out of this lifted thing? Well, there's a bunch of mods in order to do so, and you got to take into consideration a few things, and I set up a little thing to show you about my tires. But the first thing I would note is regular fluid changes. That includes the transmission, that includes the rear end, the front axle, and the oil. Preferably, I use full synthetic on everything. Full synthetic gives the best lubricity for the longest period of time. It has been proven. I change my oil every 3,000 miles. I do the transmission, rear end, and front differential once a year. And I know it's an old wives' tale that you don't change the transmission fluid. Well, it has a filter, and like anything with a filter, it's there for a reason, and transmission fluid doesn't last forever. Ask yourself, when was the last time I pulled my transmission dipstick, or the transmission pan was dropped, or when the rear differential cover was taken off and I checked the fluid or changed it? I would say 9 times out of 10, people don't even bother with checking that unless they had some sort of issue with it. So I change my transmission fluid every year, and I do that because the clutches in the transmission wear out, and it contaminates the transmission fluid that goes into the transmission filter, causes everything not to properly lube itself, and it's just wear and tear. Same thing with the differential, other than you can roast your gears out of it. Differential fluid should be, real, I want to say, not viscous, but it should be slippery. It shouldn't look like milk. If it does look like milk, you've got bigger issues. But everything should be proper, and that's just regular maintenance. That would be my first course of action in order to get 20 miles to the gallon. Second order of business, you want to consider your fuel, what mods you have for the fuel, the air modifications, and the exhaust. So let's start with the exhaust. I have a 3-inch downpipe with a 2.5-inch crossover pipe. I have a 4-inch straight pipe all the way out to the ass end with a 10-inch exhaust tip. For air, I'm running a SMB cold air intake, and for fuel, and this is where the mods get all over the place, I have a tuned ECM from Quadstar, a number 5 resistor on the PMD. I have an optical bump on the injection pump. I have the Feed the Beast mod. I've got the Fast 165 lift pump, and I have marine injectors. So, back to my video on, installing the Fast 165. If you watch that video all the way through, I kind of went into depth of all the other fuel modifications. if you're going to put more fuel to these trucks, but you want good MPGs, you're going to have to match it with the right air fuel mixture. So if you put a bunch of fuel to it, but your turbo just cannot take the right amount of air to properly have the fuel air mixture, you're blowing fuel out the tailpipe. Is that black smoke? Yeah, that's just wasting fuel. So you want to match it with proper air. Oh, one air modification I forgot, and it goes on to one of the next topics. But I also have a spring-loaded manual wastegate. So I have all these fuel modifications, and if I was to leave the turbo alone, I wouldn't have the correct air fuel mixture. I'll get into how much air I'm actually putting to it driving down the highway. But the fuel, I'm pumping fuel into it. You gotta mix the air fuel ratio properly, or you're just wasting it. So, on to the next thing is cooling. I did a video on, or it was my first video on bomb-proofing the 6.5. I say cooling because heat is a parasitic draw. It's mechanical, it's mechanical action to putting more fuel to it. The more fuel you put to it without air, the hotter it's going to be. The hotter your EGTs are going to be, the hotter your motor's going to get, the harder the transmission's working. So keeping it cool will keep it at the correct operating temperature in order to achieve 20 miles to the gallon. So for my cooling, I have the high flow, I believe it's the 185 gallons per hour water pump. I have the severe duty fan, the fan clutch. I got the Duramax fan. I'm keeping pretty cool, and changing your fluids regularly help keep it cool. Some of you may know that this is a piston squirter block, or piston squirter motor. So what that means is that you have little, almost straws on the very bottom of your block that squirt oil up to the bottom of the piston. That is designed to keep your pistons cool and prevent them from cracking. If you don't change your oil regularly, or use crude oil, or not synthetic, those piston squirters don't work anything under 20 psi on your oil pressure gauge. They don't do the job. The oil would squirt up, kind of just bounce back off the piston. That is designed to keep that piston cool, which in turn keep your engine cool. Also, with the turbo, if you're dumping a bunch of fuel into it and you haven't done anything with the turbo, you're making it really, really hot. And what do diesels function off? Air and fuel. Cold air is more condensed than hot air. So the colder you can get that air, not having a hot turbo, the colder you can have that air, the better fuel air mixture you're gonna have. I'm all over the place, but keep it cool. I have the 180 degree thermostats. That is proper operating temperature for these engines. They like to be cool, they like to run efficiently, and they sip fuel. Also on the cooling, I haven't done this yet, and I plan on doing them to it. If friggin' bugs. The transmission cooler, known for leaking on these trucks. The push style cooler with the clip that just holds it in is known for leaking. That's just being mindful of what leaks you got. They make a bigger transmission cooler for it, and it helps keep that transmission cool. Also, with the rear end, don't put, and I know it looks cool because I wanted one until I watched Gail Banks's video on them, the flat back differential covers. You got to go watch that video. It's super handy. There's a lot of good information, but the flat back diff covers create a lot more heat in the rear differential and doesn't lubricate your rear diff properly. More heat equals a parasitic draw, or a loss of power, loss of fuel economy, and more wear and tear on the differential. I know they look cool, but there are other differentials out there that also look pretty dope that are a better option than the flat back. Or if you really wanted to be, if you gotta have that flat back differential cover, you put it on over your factory one. The factory one works better of keeping that differential cool than that flat back one. Just keep the drive line cool. Also, with the drive line, make sure you don't have any bad U-joints, bad carrier bearings, all that's another parasite that it makes the drive line less efficient. Make your truck work for you, not against you. So let's move on to the gearing setup, the tires, the RPMs, the real kind of meat and potatoes of this. So when my truck was made from factory as a dually, and when I swapped it over to a single wheel, I had smaller single wheels on it without the lift. They were 31-inch tires, and now I have 35s. Also, I have a factory 4L80E transmission. I regularly check my drive line, make sure I don't have any bad carrier bearing, U-joint, anything like that. I make sure that my alignment is proper. You guys would be surprised at how far off having a bad alignment will affect your fuel economy. If there's any sort of drag in the front end or the ass end of your truck, it's a parasite. You're making the motor work harder to keep it in the middle of the road. So, these trucks are not aerodynamic, to say the least. They are built like bricks. They are humongous and square. This air dam is real squared up. It just, wind does not deflect off this front end efficiently. But that doesn't mean that you can't get good fuel economy. So let's talk about my tires and my gearing. I have 410 gears, which is absolutely phenomenal for pulling. 410s and 411s are great for pulling. A great highway gear is like a 373 gear ratio. But for a heavy duty truck, and if you're going to put big tires on it, you want that low gear, and here's why. I also mentioned I get around 15 mpg when driving around town. So the lower geared multiplies my torque. So torque is what you use to take off or start moving from a stop. Excuse me. So you need that torque to start going, especially with bigger tires. If you had smaller tires, then 373s would really help you. But the 410 gears help rotate these big tires from a stop. If I was to drive nothing but highway, I would swap it over to a 373, 373 gear ratio. But that low gear helps turn these big tires. Now, we also have to talk about RPMs. So you need to find the sweet spot in order to kind of calculate fuel mileage. So the sweet spot is just after the truck gets into overdrive. Doesn't matter what speed you're going, but hitting that sweet spot, the motor is working how do I want to say? It's not giving it the full power. So you want to keep your RPMs low and go the furthest distance in order to get great fuel mileage. Keep it right around, so I wrote this down too. I am running 60 miles an hour down the highway at 1700 RPM. That's right where it's just above overdrive. So just as soon as my truck shifts into overdrive, I'm running 1700 RPM. Once it's in overdrive, and I'm going 60 miles an hour. So if you want to try to stay under $2,000. If you can stay under $2,000, you're not overloading the motor and you're not burning fuel. Keeping it right in that sweet spot is going to help your fuel mileage, because you're not making your truck work harder than you would, say, keeping it right around just after it hits overdrive. Also, the lower gears help me achieve that by, once I hit overdrive, my truck does not have to work as hard to maintain that speed. So as long as I'm staying right in that sweet spot, this truck basically just rolls down the road with me lightly tapping the fuel pedal. So let's see, tire size, RPM, yes. So keep your truck in that sweet spot. So tire size helps you go the distance quicker than a smaller tire size. And I have this little thing, a little diagram. So say this one is my 31-inch tire that I used to have on the truck, going at the same RPM and overdrive. Let's see, it makes it that far, okay? So right about there. Have this represent my 37-inch tire. And you can see that the 37 has a bigger footprint than the 31-inch tire. So, continuing that, the same RPM with a larger tire, I will go a further distance and I won't be working the motor harder. I will be working at the same, I'll be working at the same, running at 1700 RPM, but I will go further because of the bigger footprint. Also, the different materials that tires are made up of actually help or disadvantage you from going that further distance. I saw a documentary about they used the exact same size tire, but it was made up of different components. It was different materials, and the more grip that the tire has, the smaller footprint it will make just based on what the tire is made up of. So, you got to factor in tires, you got to factor in gear ratio, you got to factor in what RPM I'm in, how far I'm able to go off the same RPM. But that's why I also had to go with the lift kit. And in coming off or going on the highway, I'm able to travel a farther distance, same RPM, working my motor the same amount, but I'm able to go a farther distance just because my tires are bigger and make a larger footprint per revolution. So we talked about coolant, we talked about my fuel, air, exhaust, such and such. I really want to talk about this last piece, and I've mentioned it here a minute ago, but it's parasites. Things that have a parasitic draw, and I'm referring to mechanically, not electronically. So think of if you're sitting at idle and you turn your AC on, you hear the RPMs change and it drops because it puts a parasitic load on the motor. The harder you are working that motor, the more fuel it is going to take in order to make it have the same power. The AC compressor and the vacuum pump are two of the bigger things to take into consideration. Heat, I've mentioned heat. Heat is a parasite. You want to keep these things cool. I can't stress that enough, whether it be transmission, motor, rear end, front diff. Flatback differential covers, just keep the heat down. Give it fuel, give it equal amount of air. Oh, I forgot to mention the air. So driving at 1700 RPM, going 60 miles an hour, my boost gauge is reading right around 8 pounds. So I'm giving it air, I'm giving it fuel. The motor doesn't have to work as hard to maintain the same speed if it had smaller tires. So, it's a lot to consider in order to get the best fuel economy out of this. And this is all on perfect days, not raining, no real traffic, no people pissing you off, not towing a trailer. This is all just this truck rolling down the highway at 60 miles an hour, maintaining 1700 RPMs in my case. As long as you can keep the RPMs in overdrive at under 2000 RPM, you should be able, with all the mods, everything like that, you should be able to get proper fuel mileage or decent fuel mileage. And that's one of the great selling points about these trucks is they do get great fuel mileage. I actually had somebody in my last video comment, and his name was Wayne Ferguson. He has a 1998 GMC that's getting 26 mpg. I believe it. These trucks do sip fuel, and you can get great mileage out of them. And again, that's one of the great selling points about this. I can't say I've seen it in person that it getting 26 miles to the gallon, but I take the guy at his word. Now, if you said it was getting 50 miles to the gallon, I'd call you bullshit, but I digress. So I hope that was able to help you out. If you'd like to see more videos like this, I pull up a little tire deal to, let's see, a little tire deal to, you know, give you guys more or less a science experiment and a bunch of math. But I really hope that helped you guys out in order to get, decent fuel mileage out of your trucks. If you guys have any other questions, comments, concerns, please leave them down in the comments below. If you like this video, please let me know by smacking the crap out of that like button. I greatly appreciate it. I also greatly appreciate all y'all's kind words in the comments. I can't stress that enough how much, it makes me want to keep doing these videos for you guys. So I believe that is about it for this one. The next one, I already have it in my head. Somebody asked if I could do the history and the different blocks, so I hope you guys will stay tuned for that video. Again, any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down in the comments. I will be sure to answer. Thank you all so much for watching. I will catch you legends in the next one. Have a good one.